Hello students. In this video I will go over the instructions for the lab exercise 2. So the material, the lab instructions plus the data file found in course content. Actually the data file, the Excel file we're going to use is the one that you used finished up with lab exercise number 1. So here's the instructions. It's divided into two parts. One is more quantitative, one is more qualitative for lab exercise sheet 1 and sheet 2. What we're going to do first of all is go into the lab exercise 1 data file that we were working on in the last lab exercise, and you'll notice that we still have, there's a histogram, there's our data table. We're going to come back to the data table later on, but right now we're going to work on continuing to work in the lab exercise 1 data sheet. So following the instructions, we want to calculate the mean and the median of the ungrouped data sheet. So here is the ungrouped data. Remember the name that we used, so we can put in here the mean, or you can type in the average and the median. So the function for mean is using average and bracket, highlight all your data, or enter the name of your data. So the average, my average is just over 21,400. You will have a different average as well. Median, same thing. Oops, typed the name in right. And mean and median. Your mean and median will not be the same as mine, and they will not be the same as each other. We want both of these to 2 decimal places. So let's go like that. We want to calculate the skewness of the data. There is an Excel function to calculate how skewed the data is, but we are just going to use the basic one. Basic one is mean minus median. My value is negative. We're not going to look at the actual size of the number. Basically this means that it's negative. There's more data skewed to the left. Some of you will have a positive value. Basically this means that there are more smaller values which are bringing down the average. As discussed in class, the mean or the average is influenced by extreme values, whereas the median is not. Step 4, we want to calculate the variance and the standard deviation. The function for the variance is VARP, bracket, highlight all your data, or enter the name. There's the variance, and more importantly the standard deviation, STDEVP, bracket, name of your data. My standard deviation is slightly over or just under 3,300. That value becomes important in later sections. We can, however, use the standard deviation to compare how spread out data sets are. So if your standard deviation is less than mine, that would mean that my data set is more spread out. So if your standard deviation is bigger than my standard deviation, it means that your data set, your values are more spread out. We can make that comparison because generally our data set comes from the same population and has relatively the same size of values. What we want to do next is just look at the relationship between the standard deviation and the variance. The relationship is that if we square the standard deviation, which if you go equals, click on that standard deviation, go shift 6 and enter 2 for the exponent, we will get the variance. An important function that we will use later on as well is the square root, SQRT. We take the square root not of the data set, but the square root of one number. The square root of the variance should equal the standard deviation. Moving on, step 5 is we want to calculate some percentiles. So let's put some titles in here. We want to calculate these percentiles: the 35th, the 50th, the 75th, and the first quartile. So you should remember that the first quartile is similar or is identical to the 25th percentile. So we're going to calculate those values as using the percentile function. We could calculate 3 of these values, these 3, as quartiles as well. So the function for percentile is nice and simple. Just equals percentile, bracket, the array is all your data set, comma, the percentile. Now the percentile has to be given as a decimal number. So it has to be, instead of saying 35, it's actually 0.35 for Excel. So what we are going to do, instead of entering that value as is, or changing the actual percentiles, we are just going to click on that percentile value and divide by 100. Close the bracket, and there is the percentile. If we copy these down, we have the percentiles for all for those four values. You should note right in there, let's make that yellow to help it stand out. This is the same as the median. The 50th percentile and the median are the same values. Now if we wanted to, we could calculate the first, second, and third quartiles, or we can calculate those values using a quartile function. It's equals quartile, the array is your data set, and the quart number we need is the actual value of 1, 2, or 3. So there's our first quartile, which is the same as our 25th percentile. Copying this down, you'll get the second quartile is the same as the 50th percentile, which is the same as the median. The third quartile is the same as the 75th percentile. So that's a quick way to calculate percentiles and quartiles. Let's move on to calculating the IQR. IQR interquartile range and the CV. Interquartile range is a difference between the third quartile and the first quartile, or it's a difference between the 75th percentile and the 25th percentile. So I'm going to just click on the value for 3, click on the value for the first quartile, and there is the interquartile range. This is basically the size of the middle 50% of the data, the range of the middle 50% of the data. Some some governments use this in terms of calculating how big the middle 50% of income earners are. What is the range of that value? CV is the standard deviation divided by the mean. And this is generally listed as a percentage. So this value, the coefficient of variance, allows us to compare data sets that have different units. If your coefficient of variance is bigger than 15%, it means that your data set is more spread out than mine. If mine is bigger than yours, then my data set is more spread out than your data set. We can calculate the weighted average in step 7. In order to do that, we need to go into our data table sheet that has our histogram on it. We'll move this over. We want to calculate the weighted average of grouped data. Back in lab exercise 1, we calculated the average of the ungrouped data, but now we want to calculate the average using the grouped data, and this comes handy. Sometimes we are given a data table without the actual data, all 420 pieces of data, or we were maybe given a data table in some research we are reading and they don't include the average. So we can do a really quick process to calculate that average. First thing we need to do is this column, we'll call it midpoint, or M for short. Basically it is the middle value for each class. So my class, 10,000 to under 12,000, take those two values, find the middle value, find the midpoint. So 10,000 plus 12,000 is 22,000. 22,000 divided by 2 gives me a value of 11,000. I can do the same thing for the next class. The middle value between 12 and 14,000 would be 13,000. You'll notice that your midpoint value is going up by your class width. So I've just entered a quick formula to go equals the value, the midpoint value above it, plus 2000. You can only do that if the class size is the same. And just to verify, the last midpoint is 29,000, which is halfway between 28 and 30,000. So that is our midpoint. We have this last column called FM column. Basically, it's the frequency. This value here times the value in the midpoint. So enter that formula. It's frequency times midpoint. And there we go, 22,000. Add that, filter that down there. Do an auto sum. And then the grouped average, or the group mean, is going to be this total of the FM divided by how many pieces of data we have. We're getting 21,300. You will get a different value. My average of the ungrouped data is 21,400. They won't be exact, but they should be close. So that wraps it up for the first part of this lab exercise. We're going to go into exercise 2 and use some Countif functions for all of the colors that we have in column C. What I'm going to do first is, actually I have to copy all these values like we did in the first part of our exercise last week, and copy, do a paste special value so these values won't change. And we're going to hide the middle few of them. Oops. And hide. Now we have to go through there and basically find how many colors we have. The colors are green. Oops. Make sure you start below where you cut off. So we have green, blue, red, has to be capitalized, orange, there's 7 colors, yellow, pink, and purple. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're going to use an Excel function called Countif. Countif the range, all of these values, comma, what we want it to count. So we know that there's 52 green colors in there. If we copy that down, we just have to keep the cell range for the colors absolute. Copy this down, and we get those values. We do a total. We know there's 385 pieces of data. Now what we want to do is create a nice little pie chart. When you create that chart, don't include the total. And there is a nice little pie chart. What we want to do here is add the data labels, format the data labels to put them outside, and to show the category name. And instead of the value, we want to show the percentage. Make that a little larger. We can get rid of the legend. And we can take these values outside, and they will be joined by what's called a leader line. Doing this, especially with putting the labels right beside the pie section, is if somebody does print this off in black and ink, black copy. I'm trying to grab that one. Let's go over here. It's still going to help them understand what each section represents. So the next thing we want to do is we can change the color. So this is the green section. Double click on that. Go up here to your paint can, make that green. Double click on that blue section, make that blue. Makes it a little easier. Red. This is orange already. This should be a nice yellow. That's pink. Ooh, I can't really see pink too well. Yeah, that's pink. And purple. There we go. Save your work. Basically, you can continue with the next one if you wanted to, but basically your lab exercise should look like this.